Good afternoon and welcome to everybody, presenters and also those of you logging on. It's good to have you here. In this current climate, really, we are supporting our network of FDs and CFOs with a series of presentations and webinars. And this week's brings us back to the topic of Brexit as we navigate through this transition period and really how businesses can ready themselves for the new trading period next year. So in this presentation, I'll let the presenters, I'll introduce them in a second, but I'll let them get on with the presentations. If anybody does have any questions along the way, please feel free to use the chat icon at the bottom of your screens. I'll keep an eye on that and I'll try and get through as many questions at the end of the presentation on that. So please feel free during the presentation to fire any questions at me. I'll keep an eye on it. So but without further ado, let me introduce the two presenters today. We've got Alison Horner, who's a partner and the head of indirect tax at MHA, and also Andrew Thurston, who's the customs duty consultant, again, at MHA MacIntyre Hudson. Thank you to you both for your time. The floor is yours. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Lawrence. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. As you would imagine, we have been working extensively around Brexit for many years now, actually, and here we are again. So we're going to talk to you today about the key issues that are affecting the businesses that we work with, and things are moving so quickly that we're finding that, you know, as things are moving, even though people think, oh, well, there isn't much of any sort of real information yet, we're really finding that people are wanting to know really detailed information about things like export declarations, how they import, etc. So we're going to be covering off VAT and customs duty today, with a particular emphasis on customs duty. So if we go to our first slide. So as we all know, from the 1st of January, any goods that and we're talking about goods here, not services, any goods that we supply from the UK into Europe, they're going to be exports from the UK. They're no longer going to be intra-EU dispatches. They're going to be exports and they're going to be subject to declarations. Likewise, anything that we buy from Europe and bring into the UK will be an import. So gone are the days of frictionless travel across that border. We're going to have to stop and think about the paperwork and how we actually facilitate those declarations taking place. So there's only a matter of weeks before we reach this the deadline of the transition period being over. I can't believe it that we're nearly at November. You know, we all thought that it was going to be the 15th of October, in line with what Boris had said, that was his deadline, and it coincided with the EU Council meeting. And the thought that by the 31st of October, in our timeline here, that was the date when really the EU needed to be able to agree it at their plenary sessions and get it through the European Parliament. We've obviously seen that this has now become fluid again, that these deadlines that were imposed maybe not be deadlines anymore. If we look further along, we've got the end of November, which was the original deadline for the deal to be presented to the European Parliament to make it law. But then equally in December, we do have these European Council meetings and other parliamentary plenaries where, you know, we've all seen it happen before. Last minute deals may be able to happen and to get through. But certainly one thing's for sure, 31st of December 2020 is when this transition period ends. The legal points for that being changed are welcome. So that's what we're aiming for. So if we move to the next slide, we'll be able to talk to you about the key things. Let's look at the key issues first of all on the customs changes. Now, first of all, you'll probably all have seen that the UK has introduced a new UK global tariff. So Andrew, do you want to talk us through what that is, where people can find it if they've not already seen it, and how they can compare it?
Yeah, so in May, the UK announced the new UK global tariff. Because we're splitting from the EU, we've got our own tariff that will apply from the 1st of January. That's available to view on the .gov website. And it gives you the details of the UK and the EU duty rates from the 1st of January. the tariff has been designed in conjunction with businesses. There was an exercise completed in March to get feedback on the sort of measures that they were looking to impose, and they've agreed certain changes to the existing tariff. So simplification of banding, so dropping it down to each 2%. Up to the 20% mark. So if it was 6.5% before, it drops down to 6%. So if you're importing goods from China and US or wherever, you'll see that your duty rate will drop down accordingly. There's also the scrapping of the nuisance tariffs. So anything that's 2% or under, they'll be reduced down to nil. It was considered that it was too much of an administrative burden to keep those, so they decided to scrap those. There's also liberalisation. So materials and goods that are involved in a manufacturing process in the UK or are not manufactured in the UK have been liberalised, and the duty rate's been taken down to 0%. So that was on 2,000 commodity codes in the new tariff. They've also removed the complicated calculations on agricultural goods, so calculations for milk fats and sugars, starches, all those sorts of things. They've been taken away to make it easier for businesses to establish the classification and the duty that's applicable for those goods. So I say that comes into force on the 1st of January 2021.
Thanks, Andrew. And I think that tariff is quite easy to find, isn't it? Where can everybody go to have a look at it?
If you go into a search engine and put in UK global tariff, it should take you to the page. If not, go in the .gov website and in the search engine put UK global tariff. You should be able to do that. The good thing about it is, like I say, it's got the two different duty rates. You can see what the EU rate is and what the UK rate will be. There's also a function to search, and you can also upload or download the data that you want, either into a CSV file or into an Excel spreadsheet, so you can populate your account software if necessary.
And certainly we found, haven't we, that, you know, if you haven't already looked at what your supply chain tariffs may be, some people have been pleasantly surprised thinking that they've maybe got a 1.7% duty rate to pay on goods that they're bringing in from Europe, to find that they're reduced down to 0. So some pleasant surprises rather than just the bad news side of Brexit. And one of the other things that's coming in, which is a really good cash flow benefit for every VAT registered business, is that rather than having import VAT, where when the goods are cleared, you pay import VAT, you pay it up front, and then you claim it back on your VAT return. You get a certificate the month following, so it can be up to about 4 months before you can get that VAT back. So that's been abolished, and it's going to be from the 1st of January, and the VAT won't be paid to clear the goods. Instead, it will be accounted for on the VAT return, so very similar to the intra-EU VAT calculation you would have to do. It will be calculated as an output tax and then claimed back as an input tax, netting down to nil on your VAT return. It isn't a mandatory thing though, so you can still pay the import VAT up front if you want and have a C79, but we expect that the majority of people will want to use postponed import VAT accounting, and it will be down to your agent clearing the goods to tick a box to notify HMRC not to calculate the import VAT at the time, and you'll get a similar type of certificate to the import VAT certificate, which will be your postponed monthly sort of account that you'll use as a basis for doing your VAT return entry. And then, Andrew, shall we move on to deferred import declarations, which has been in the press but may not be the magic solution that we would all hope for?
Yeah, so because of the COVID crisis, the government decided to introduce deferred import declarations because the freight sector weren't able to recruit the staff that was required to meet the demand. So they're hoping that there'll be quite a bit of uptake on this. But basically, companies who import standard goods, so non-excise goods, non-controlled or prohibited goods, can import goods into the UK without having to make a customs declaration at that time, there are requirements in terms of having to provide information to the haulier to get the goods into the country, but it would mean that you basically get 6 months in which to submit that declaration to the HMRC. Obviously there's an advantage to that. You don't have to pay the customs duty at the time of import. You can delay that payment. The VAT element, although you'd be using postponed import VAT accounting, you still have to account for everything through your monthly VAT return or your periodic VAT return. So once the customs declaration has been submitted at a later date, there may be a requirement to make an adjustment on your VAT return. So that's something to be considering. But it is there as a way of alleviating the requirement to make a declaration between the 1st of January up to the 30th of June. And so you get 6 months in which to submit that declaration, but you need the records in your accounts and your internal systems to be able to construct that and provide the information to the freight agent to submit that declaration on your behalf.
Thanks, Andrew. So moving on to the next slide. One thing that we need to let you know about is that a lot of Chinese, US businesses that sell business to consumer will use the low value consignment bulking order in order to bring in a whole container load of goods. They pay the VAT and duties paid by them, but then the consumer is the importer. That is going to be disappearing from the 1st of January. So it's going to be really bringing overseas sellers and online marketplaces into the remit of VAT. So VAT registration for those types of businesses. And then we move on to Northern Ireland. So Andrew will explain a little bit about that, and then we talk about it a bit later as well.
Yeah, so the trader support system, it was announced a few weeks ago, and it's specifically for imports into Northern Ireland. Excuse me. So if you're currently got customers in Northern Ireland, you will need to register for this system because you're going to have to make a minimal declaration via the TSS system to get the goods from Great Britain into Northern Ireland. It's a free to use service being provided by the UK government to be able to meet the requirements of the Northern Ireland Protocol, to make sure that any sort of physical and documentary checks can be carried out at arrival into Northern Ireland, and once they're in Northern Ireland, they're free to move across the whole of the island of Ireland. That's the point, to minimise sort of border checks and everything else. So that's the system. So if you do have customers in Northern Ireland, you'll need to sort of register for the TSS system. It's not ready to use yet, but there is a registration process just to be made aware of future developments and get ready for its implementation on the 1st of January.
So those are some of the key issues. We're going to now take a look at exports, because one of the biggest things that we talk to our businesses about and what they're finding at the moment is they really need to understand what paperwork's involved. How do I do this? Can I sell things X works? Does it need to be something else? How do we get the goods out of the country? Who's responsible for it? So I think this is probably the most critical thing at the moment. So we're going to talk you through that process.
Okay, so initially there'll be an order placed for the goods. So your customer will will request some goods to be shipped over to the EU. So at this point, your company should be looking at what are the terms I'm going to sell those goods under. Some companies will have long-term customers and they'll have agreed contracts that are in place, probably just stating delivery or collection. But once we leave the EU, Incoterms will become important, which bring into the delivery process the customs side of things. So who's responsible for the export declaration, who's responsible for the import declaration, payment of the customs duties, and all those sorts of bits and pieces that haven't needed to be considered before. So at this point, it's important to make sure that you confirm the trading terms and you understand what your responsibilities are going to be in terms of supplying those goods to your customer. So obviously you'd arrange for the supply or the manufacturer to be completed, and then at that point the goods, the commercial documents would be sent over, to the sales invoice, any packing list and things like that go direct to the customer, confirming the sale. So at that point, once they're ready to move, the goods are shipped to the port, and at the same time, a customs export declaration will now be required to export the goods out of the UK. Like I say, depending on your shipping terms, it's either going to be you as the UK company exporting the goods, or if it's under ex works terms, it could be your customer that is responsible for submitting the export or arranging the submission of the export declaration. But an export declaration will be required, and certain documentation will be needed by the freight agent to submit that on the behalf of the exporter. So once that's been,
it's a really key bit, that, isn't it? That is such a key part of all of this, and it's a part that everybody needs to think about, because without that export declaration being made, the goods are not going to leave the country. So no. if you've got ex works, which a lot of people have, the customer comes along, picks up the goods, then that customer has got to be able to do this export declaration. Now, they're not going to have an EORI number, a UK EORI number, to be able to do it. So they've either got to get the customs agent to do it, so they've got to find one, or they might even be able to, do you think, Andrew, enter you as the supplier's details into that to be able to show that the supplier has exported these goods from the UK?
At the current time, yeah, the UK legislation allows for the UK company to be stated as the exporter, which means if HMRC decided to do a customs audit on exports, they would come to the UK company. But all the shipping paperwork, evidence of export would be provided to the actual EU company, and that's the risk with ex works. But from the 1st of January, there's potentially a change in the fact that a non-UK company cannot be declared as the exporter. So that would mean that they would have to employ the freight agent to declare the goods. The freight agent would be declared as the exporter, and they would be declared in the body of the export declaration. That's the way the legislation has been written, and that follows along the same lines as the EU legislation, which has the same changes which were made a couple of years ago. So that's why the terms and agreements and everything are so important in this process, to understand who does what, to make it as simple as possible, but understanding who's going to be responsible for the declaration and any payment of duties.
Because it's not only the customs duty that we've got at stake here, because for you to sell those goods to that European customer as an export, you want to treat that as VAT zero rated. And you need proof that those goods have been exported to be able to justify zero rating that. So again, that export declaration, if you're not doing it because you've sold it ex works, you're going to have to liaise with your customer to make sure you've got that documentation to support your zero rating. Otherwise, again, there's another big risk on the VAT side. So I do think that export declaration, it costs money, doesn't it? All of these things are a cost. I take the point that a UK business is going to want to keep on selling ex works because they don't want to pay the cost of the export declaration. So I think that is a really important conversation with your customers about this declaration and how it's done.
Yeah, it's obviously making sure that your customers can provide you with the satisfactory evidence of export, certificate of shipment, or an airway bill or bill of lading, something that confirms the goods have left the UK. Because, like you say, if you as a UK company haven't got that evidence, then you will be liable for the VAT on that sale, because you've not got satisfactory evidence to confirm the export from the UK. So moving on from that, obviously the goods get shipped to the EU. Whilst that's happening, the import declaration is submitted to the EU authorities. They have to be pre-entered because it gives the EU customs authorities the chance to select it for an inspection. It might need a documentary check if there's a license, or there's a query on the commodity code or something like that, or it might even need a physical check because of the nature of the goods. They might be food produce or live animals, something like that might require a physical check. So by the time the goods get to the EU border, they will be made available for inspection. So at that point, there's an the import declaration is either accepted or sent for further checking. But if it's accepted, the customs duties will be due. One thing to consider is if you're bringing goods in to the EU, but they're actually going to be sold in Germany, then they will move under transit arrangements and be declared into Germany, not into France. So that's an additional thing that is an automatic process that your customs agent and haulier will arrange for you, but it means that the import declaration will be made in the member state where the goods are being sold to, rather than directly into France. So obviously, if it's moving into, say, for instance, Germany, it'll move under transit arrangements, so it's still under customs supervision. Obviously the import declaration will be cleared, duty and VAT paid, and the delivery is completed. So that's the sort of overview of an export process. If you're dealing with DDP terms, all of this will be dealt with by yourselves. Inside of that, the different Incoterms that move that responsibility either way, depending on the term. So at some point, somebody has to be responsible for all of this part of the movement. It's just establishing during your negotiations or what your current terms are, who is responsible for which part. Okay, so the other consideration we're seeing a lot of uptake on is customs warehousing. So it might be that you do export into the EU market, but actually you've imported the goods either from the EU or from outside the EU, so from China, for instance. To avoid paying duty on import into the UK and then potentially being liable to the duty on entry into Europe, customs warehousing will minimise that duty footprint by suspending the customs duties on arrival into the UK. If the goods remain in the UK, then you'll need to submit a customs declaration and the customs duty is paid at that time. But if you decide to ship them out into the EU market, that's an export, so there's no liability for the customs duties. So it enables businesses to control where the goods are going to and only pay the duties on removal from the warehouse rather than at time of importation. So it's a potential way of minimising your duty footprint.
I'd just add to that on the customs warehousing. Obviously, we saw a lot of interest in that as we were heading towards a no deal. That interest has, I suppose, waned again at the moment because people are hoping that we will secure a deal. I think if we do have a deal, Andrew, is it right that warehousing might then become really important as far as protecting origin?
Potentially, yeah. If you're, for instance, importing goods from Europe, but you might be supplying them back into Europe or into Southern Ireland, for instance, by using customs warehousing and transit arrangements, you can keep the EU status of the goods so that you don't pay duty going back into Europe. So it might be that you source goods from Germany. Some of those goods, but those goods that you know are going to go back into France, you can import them in, keep them stored, and then export them back out under transit arrangements, so you don't actually pay any customs duties at any point because the goods remain as EU origin. They never leave customs supervision, and the transit part is the important part to keep it under transit control. It keeps its EU status.
Thank you.
Okay, so obviously looking at processing and manufacturing, it's likelihood that a lot of companies will be involved in the manufacturing process at some point, and it's understanding the mechanisms that customs have got to minimise the potential for duty within the UK. If you're a company who imports goods for manufacturing or some sort of process, it might just be for repair. You might be the EU hub for repairs or that sort of work. Now you can import the goods without paying the duty and the VAT, and it's under inward processing relief. So you have to be approved by HMRC to do this if you're going to do more than 3 shipments a year, but it allows for the suspension of the customs duties on arrival into the UK. So in this particular instance, you would the EU manufacturer, for instance, would manufacture the goods and ship them over. Again, on exportation out of the EU, there would be an export declaration. If they might even be approved by their customs authorities to ship it out under a temporary relief or something like that. But the goods get shipped to the UK. So on arrival into the UK, the goods are declared to inward processing relief, which automatically suspends the customs duties. So the goods can then move on into your premises for the processing and manufacturing side of things. So you can import goods from all over the world under this inward processing authorization, suspending the customs duties. You might have 1,000 different parts that come in. You make one finished product. Those goods can then be re-exported, and that discharges the liability for all the customs duties on those imported goods. So when we look to re-export, the processed goods would go back out again. You ship the goods to the port. At that point, there's a customs declaration made to export the goods out. At that point, the customs duties are discharged, and the goods can go back to wherever they need to go. They can go to the EU, China, wherever. In this case, exported to the EU. So on arrival into the EU, customs duties are due based upon what's provided by yourselves. If you're moving goods between 2 companies, then they might be approved for outward processing, which I'll talk about in a minute, and they might minimise their duty liability based upon that authorisation. Failing that, that sale into the EU the duty will be based upon your sales price, and the EU components won't be considered to be EU anymore; they'll be UK. And then obviously the goods are delivered to the customer. So that's one way of minimising the liability for customs duties if you're importing goods for processing. If we then look at outward processing, it's the complete opposite. So if you're sending goods to the EU for some form of process, you can be approved by HMRC to ship the goods out. So at the time of export, you would declare it to the temporary export customs procedure code. That informs HMRC that the goods are going out, but they could be coming back. It doesn't affect the duty status in any way. It's just an indicator to HMRC, and it's a requirement under outward processing to link the 2 up. So the goods would get shipped to the EU, and on arrival into the EU, an import declaration would need to be made. Again, if the EU company is importing goods for processing, they're likely to have inward processing relief. So they would enter it into inward processing, therefore suspending the customs duties. So the whole thing links up to be able to minimise that duty element. And the goods get delivered for the process in the EU. So when the goods come back, an invoice will be created by the EU company. It should detail the customs value for the goods and any work that was included, so labour costs, additional materials, and those sorts of things, because that's important when it comes to importing the goods back into the UK. So again, an export declaration out of the EU, if they were approved for inward processing, that would discharge their duty liability. And once the goods get shipped into the UK, there's an import declaration entering the goods to the customs procedure code for outward processing relief using your customs authorization number, and that would calculate the customs duties. So for outward processing, the customs duties are only liable on the non-UK materials used. any non-UK costs, so labour and bits and pieces, and the freight costs from the EU to the UK border, so either the tunnel crossing or the ferry. So it means that you're not paying the duty on the goods that you actually exported out of the UK, and then the goods get delivered back to your premises as a processed good. Okay, so one of the things that we've mentioned a lot is obviously Incoterms. So that's the big thing that we obviously like to cover during these sorts of events.
I think that come Christmas, we'll all be able to have a Christmas quiz on these, because we'll all be so familiar with ex-works, free carrier, DAP and DDP. They're the main ones, aren't they, Andrew? And
that's it, yeah.
It's so vital.
At the moment, you're obviously probably looking at ex-works or DDP, and depending on the contracts you have with your customers in the EU, if you're exporting to the EU, they probably want the goods delivered to their door with no involvement in the customs process. Therefore, it will be DDP, because the seller is responsible for everything, including delivery up to the destination. That means that the UK company will be responsible for arranging and being declared as the importer into the EU, paying the customs duties and the import VAT where it's liable. So that's the consideration, and certainly for VAT purposes, is something that we've worked quite a lot on with other companies to get them all set up to be able to operate that way of working. Then the other end of the scale is ex-works, where basically the seller just packages the goods and then makes it available for the customer to collect from their door, and then everything else is dealt with by the buyer. So any export licensing, the export paperwork, export declaration, that's all dealt with by the buyer. The seller just provides their commercial invoice for the sale, but apart from that, that's all they get involved in. And that's the issue with VAT evidence, is that they're not involved at all in the shipment of the goods out of the UK.
And that's why we then go on to talk about, and I think there's a bit of a rumour around at the moment, isn't there, Andrew, that, well, ex-works is finished as far as Brexit's concerned and you won't be able to use it. I think that isn't the case. You certainly can still use ex-works, but you really need to be careful, and it's really important to communicate with your customer about how you get this proof of export and how they make that export declaration, because then it might just be that between you decide that FCA is the right terms to use.
Yep, and it's also making sure that your customs agent will be able to declare the goods on your behalf, because if you're the buyer, you're arranging for the export declaration in the UK, but you're based in the EU, you won't be able to be declared as the exporter from the 1st of January. So you'll need to arrange for your customs agent to be declared on your behalf, and that means changing the representation terms to indirect, so they're jointly liable for any errors that appear on that declaration. And there's always a risk that certain agents might think, well, I don't want that responsibility. So that's why it's a good idea to make sure you have agents in place that are willing to represent your company on that basis, because that's the last thing you want, is to arrange a shipment and then it gets to the port and it won't be released because they won't declare it for you.
And then we get into, on the other side of the channel, we get into whether or not DAP would work rather than DDP, don't we? Yeah,
so delivered at place is basically the seller arranges for the shipment of the goods to the customer's premises, but the customer would be responsible for the import clearance and any customs duties. So it would mean that the UK company in this instance wouldn't need to be registered for VAT in the EU, because they're not responsible for.
Oh, I think Andrew's frozen. Oh, there he is.
So that's the next step back from DDP.
And I think the comments we'd make with the DAP versus DDP is that for me as a customer, And I think you'll probably find that the customers are saying don't want anything to do with it. You might be saying that to your own EU suppliers, just you've got to take responsibility for DDP. So DAP to me sounds like a great solution, and it certainly can work. And there are some solutions out there as well, where there's some one-stop shops where the VAT rep will import in their name, and then they, you know, it's then an intra-EU transaction onto your customer. We'll come back to that in a bit. But with DAP, if I'm the customer and I have to then make an maybe a postponed import VAT accounting entry on my VAT return, I've got to be certain I can get that right. Otherwise, I could be heading for a big penalty coming my way on my VAT return. So I think that that's the customer experience will say that they will want to avoid that. Sorry, I'm not sure if I've frozen or whether you've frozen.
No,
Andrew,
no,
you're still there. Okay,
it's me. Yeah.
Sorry, you're just all being really still. So yeah, let's move away from Incoterms and just move quickly back to Northern Ireland. I know that on the chat and on the questions, we've got quite a few questions to pick up on things to do with terms and IPR. So we'll try and sort of hurry through Northern Ireland and VAT.
Mm-hmm. So obviously from the 1st of January, Northern Ireland will be part EU, part UK. They are separate to the current trade talks. There is the negotiation on how the Northern Ireland Protocol is going to work. So separate legislation for that, and that's currently ongoing. But it's a complex area and still being negotiated. So under the withdrawal agreement, the Northern Ireland remains part of the UK customs territory. So they'll be able to take advantage of UK free trade agreements with other countries. But they'll also remain in the EU customs union and single market, so they'll adopt EU VAT law for that purposes. So if you're importing from Northern Ireland, it's expected there'll be unfettered access. How that's going to work hasn't yet been decided. There will be some more information coming out in the next few weeks on this, more to do with goods that are imported into Northern Ireland and then into Great Britain. But for goods manufactured in Northern Ireland and then sent over to Great Britain, it'll just be a normal, currently as it is, movement. And likewise, Northern Ireland manufactured goods can go into Southern Ireland with no issues as well. So Northern Ireland takes advantage of that, remains in the EU, but remains in the UK. So that's one thing. If you're sending them over to Northern Ireland from Great Britain, like I said, there's the trader support system that will need to be completed, but because the UK authorities need to apply EU customs rules in relation to sanitary and phytosanitary, so possible physical checks. There'll be documentary checks as well on the phyto certificates. So there are additional measures that are being put in place. They're trying to minimise it as much as possible, but like I say, it's not going to be as straightforward as just sending the goods over to Northern Ireland. There will be small customs measures that are required. If you're moving goods from Northern Ireland into the EU, there's no new paperwork or tariffs, quotas, etc. The Great Britain will be classed as a land bridge from the 1st of January under transit provisions, so you can move goods from Northern Ireland across Great Britain into France or into the EU without them losing their EU status, provided they move under the transit arrangements. So it will just be classed as an intra-EU sale if you're moving from Northern Ireland.
So Andrew, does that mean you have to manufacture the goods in Northern Ireland, or they have to be produced there to qualify as Northern Ireland
if they've
goods?
been imported and the duties have been paid, then it's just like it would be if you were in Southern Ireland. You just move the goods. It's an intra-EU sale. It's if they're under customs suspension, there might be an issue. So if you purchased them if you were based in Northern Ireland, you purchased them from the US, paid the customs duties on arrival into Northern Ireland, you should be able to move them into France and Germany. That's what's being suggested, because you're part of the EU for that purpose.
And worth quickly saying that you, as a Northern Ireland business, you would also have, as well as your UK VAT number, you'd have a special EU VAT identification number starting with XI, and that's what you'd need to use as part of your intra-EU trade.
Yeah. So for importing and exporting from the rest of the world, Northern Ireland will benefit from the UK free trade agreements that will be in place. There's also talk of adding Northern Ireland into the EU trade agreements as well, so they could get benefits from both sides of it. The tariffs that will apply from the rest of the world will be UK ones, so you'll need to refer to the UK tariff, but there is again, you'll need to complete the trader support service to import those goods into Northern Ireland. So that, again, it's a slight change to what you would normally do if you're in Northern Ireland, but it's a free of charge service.
Okay, let's quickly sum up because I'm conscious of time. It goes without saying just how vital those Incoterms are. And for me, they all focus on, is it ex-works or FCA? Is it DDP or DAP? Because that's going to really influence who's making declarations and who's responsible for stuff. We've talked you through the different customs procedures to help minimise double duty if there is no trade deal. So customs warehousing, inward processing, they're all going to be vitally important if we don't have that free trade agreement and that there are positive duty rates. I think that even then, customs warehousing, in the event that there is a deal with origin, as we said, particularly in that European market, and keeping that EU origin is going to be very important, I think, particularly within the car industry. Andrew, and then there's a couple of other things on there as well.
Yeah, so AEO, it's been around for about 12 years now. It's basically a trusted trader status, HMRC audit companies. To the benefits that are that there's easier access to customs procedures or authorisations, but there's also a reduction on the duty deferment guarantee down to 30%. So there is a financial benefit to having it. With AEOS, which is for the safety and security, it's a whole process that confirms that your supply chain is trusted, so that it's recognised in countries such as the US, Japan, potentially in Europe from the 1st of January, so that you can export goods out to those countries, and there'll be minimal checks on those goods when they arrive in those countries. CFSP, that it might be that your company needs to make their own declarations because of the volume of movements that you make. CFSP is Customs Freight Simplified Procedures. That's an approval from HMRC that allows you to use software to make declarations directly into the HMRC customs declaration systems, rather than get a freight agent to do it. But again, you need to be approved, and it tends to be, like I say, if you're doing large volume of declarations, or you've got a customs warehouse facility and it's used on the removals from the warehouse. And the final one is approved exporter. So if we did get a trade deal, then origin becomes a very important issue. So if you manufacture in the UK and you can confirm that the goods are UK origin, if you're going to export them into the EU from the 1st of January, if there is a deal, to ensure that the goods get imported at a 0% duty rate, you will need a certificate, a preferential certificate that is issued either by HMRC or the Chamber of Commerce. Or you can issue an invoice declaration. But if you're doing large numbers of them, there's a cost involved in getting them stamped, and there's also a time delay. So by being an approved exporter, you can get all these done quite quickly, and it means it's a quicker turnaround. You can ship your goods a lot quicker, and it's a reasonably straightforward process to get that application, but it's all to do with origin. So if we do get a trade deal and you manufacture goods in the UK, it's certainly something that you need to consider, because it may be something that you would benefit from.
Thanks, Andrew. So just very quickly, HMRC have got some very generous grant funding that affects training, software and recruitment. Training, we ourselves are approved trainers under that under that regime. This is the sort of thing that any training that you would do, you would want to ensure that you cover: classification, valuation, how you calculate the duties, the rules of origin that Andrew mentioned, the importance of export licensing and making sure you don't fall foul of that is vital, and then all the other things that are listed there. The funding is still available until next August, I believe. So if you feel that, because you know, when you think, a lot of people think, I'll just use my customs agent, they don't have the responsibility for that export or import. It's you instructing them. So that's why I think that everybody who's involved in cross-border trade is going to have to really get to grips with all of these terms and the information. I think next we move on to a bit about VAT, so I won't keep you long. Obviously, we've been talking about exporting and importing, and if we have no deal, what does that mean for business-to-business trade? Well, really, you know, if we're buying from Europe into the UK, we're going to be wanting to agree with our supplier who's going to import those goods, because the importer into either the UK or the EU is going to be responsible for the duty and the VAT. Now, if we look at how we might get goods into Europe, there are various different ways. You could appoint a limited fiscal rep or global VAT rep in, say, France, Belgium, or Holland. They could do the import for you. They would. They all have postponed import VAT accounting. So they would pay that duty. They'd self-account for that import VAT on your behalf. And then they'd move. It works particularly well if you then moving your goods to your customer in another EU country, because that's then an intra-EU movement of goods. So that's one way of doing it, where you don't have to be registered for VAT yourselves in Europe. But that might just be a limited solution, because you may have a big volume of trade over in Europe. You may decide that you want to have a warehouse in the Netherlands and reposition your shipping. You know, and you can be registered for VAT in those countries without having a legal entity. That's obviously number one myth to dispel. And certainly in the Netherlands, you can be registered for VAT, do your own VAT returns over there, and operate just with a different VAT part in your accounting system. I make it sound easy. I know it isn't. It is a challenge, but it's doable without necessarily having to set up an entity in Europe. Obviously, that changes if you have things to do with health and safety or other regulatory goods that you do need to have, probably would need to have something of substance and an entity there. But think about, and what you do also need to think about is, if you do decide, well, I'm going to go more for me being registered and having something in a country, that we may need to have fiscal reps now that we're not in Europe in a lot of countries. Don't need one in Ireland, you don't need one in France at the moment, and you don't need one in Germany, but certainly you do need one in the Netherlands. So they're going to be, and they're no longer going to be intra-EU transactions. They're going to be exports or imports, and all the different VAT treatments as far as boxes on your VAT return are concerned. As far as if we sell as a UK business B2C, then the distance selling regime is not going to be there anymore. So I think we then need to look at, well, is my customer going to be the importer of record? Can I get a fast parcel operator to enter them as the importer, charge me back the duty and VAT? Or am I going to have to, if I'm going to be responsible for that, I've got to be clear in my terms and conditions what they are. And then again, I'm looking at being registered for VAT somewhere in Europe. Big changes are proposed in Europe from the 1st of July next year, although the Netherlands and Germany are objecting to it, so it might go back. That's called the one-stop shop. It basically, you may have heard of the mini one-stop shop, MOS, that deals with supplies of digital services to consumers. OS, one-stop shop, will apply to sales of goods to consumers, and it will require us to be registered for VAT in one country in Europe and account for that at the local rates for all our different countries that we supply to. So that is the aim of the European Union, and something that we all need to be aware of will be coming our way. If we quickly move on. Just, yeah, services, goods, things that we rely on, which we can't rely on and will no longer apply to us going forward when we leave Europe. Triangulation, which is a simplification which we might all use, where we have 3 different countries and we're the intermediary, or we have an intermediary. Call off stop simplification. So if we have goods in a country that are called off by a customer, we don't need to register for that under EU law, but when we're not in Europe, we will need to register for that. So please be aware of that. Install goods, there's often a simplification where you don't need to register for that. If you install goods, you need to notify the local authorities. Unfortunately, that won't be applicable to us either. Likewise, all these other special rules, distance selling and MOS. So a lot is going to change for us. It won't change particularly for services because we still consider that the reverse charge mechanism will work in and out of the UK and Europe. But for those things, if you're involved in them, rely on them, you won't be able to use them. Also, if you do VAT refunds via the portal, we're going to be kicked off that as well, unfortunately. And we can still do it, tighter rules, but also we need to send in spreadsheets to individual countries. So that is not going to be fun at all. So if we go to the next slide, I think we're probably at the end of our presentation, but I'm very aware that we've got some questions to answer and not a lot of time. So should we move on to that, Lawrence?
Yeah, I think if we could rattle through these questions, there's quite a few. So given the time, if we can make the answers brief, I think some of the questions that have come up, you may have answered already. So just let me know and be brief as you like. If we start with, we'll start with a question from Paul. Are there any issues with importing goods into the UK under DDP terms, specifically with the reclaim of VAT if you are not the legal owner of the goods when they enter the UK?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. You do need to be careful about the legal ownership. I think where that law was really, and Andrew will jump in as well, was aimed at agents importing them in their own name. That's a particular problem. I would have thought that if, say a European supplier is importing DDP terms into the UK, then they will still be the legal owner in my mind at that stage. They will have a liability to be registered for that in the UK. We don't need a fiscal rep, by the way, in case you've got any EU suppliers who are in that position. They would register for VAT, they would be entitled to claim back that import VAT, except they wouldn't need to do it because, of course, we'd then be on postponed import VAT accounting. But I think that would entitle them to the recovery of that import VAT.
Okay, perfect. Next one from Tom. My company currently sources material in the UK, free issue to Denmark, where they convert it with other parts and then that's sent back to the UK as an assembled product. I presume we could not use a customs warehouse, thereby no requirement for duty and VAT to be charged. So this is to do with customs warehouses. So
the goods are in the UK and exported.
Yeah, to Denmark and then
to Denmark and then re-imported back.
Yeah.
So in that instance, the goods would be exported out of the UK and processed in Europe, and then on re-importation would be entered under outward processing relief. So they'd only pay the duty on the non-UK or the EU materials and costs and the freight coming back in.
Okay. Alison, anything to add, or is that clear?
No, that's definitely an Andrew question.
And then if I address someone else's question too, I believe it's probably got either import, export to mainly Italy by the looks of it. So yeah. A couple of questions on that. Can't we clear via France rather than transfer the goods via a T1 to, for example, Italy?
I think, yeah, we can. I mean, that's the system we were talking about earlier. We're aware that there is a one-stop shop offering around the place available at the moment, but you do, I think, to make it work, you need to use their transport, particularly. But it is absolutely possible to have a fiscal rep or a global VAT rep in France clear the goods, and then they on-supply them to Italy, where they are acquired in Italy as an intra-EU acquisition.
Okay.
So yeah, that works, and it also would work in Belgium and in Holland as well.
Okay. Another similar question, how does suspension work when only part of your imported parts are going back out to the EU?
So say for instance you imported 1,000 items into the UK, but only 500 of those were put into a finished product that was re-exported. The rest of those the other 500 were in finished products that remained in the UK. For the 500 that re-exported, that would discharge the customs duty. You'd then only pay the customs duty on the 500 parts that remained in the UK. So as part of inward processing, you have to submit a bill of discharge to HMRC that confirms what was imported and what happened to those imported goods. And at that point, you would notify them that the goods are remaining in the UK, and you pay the customs duties after they issue you with a post-clearance demand.
Okay. And if you haven't got a place of establishment or a VAT number in an EU country, what terms should you use? As won't there be an inability to claim back the VAT on import in the EU? Can DAP be used where you have no EORI or VAT set up?
Certainly that's a really important and fundamental question, and it is going to very much depend on what your business is going to be going forward. If you import into a European country, say the Netherlands, where you are DDP, you are entitled and can register for VAT. You don't have to have an establishment. You can be registered for that, and you make your onward supplies of those goods. That would be DDP terms, and you would need to, and you can get that registered. If you import DAP, then I think this is the limited fiscal rep sort of concept, where we've been told that you need to have an EU EORI number, and I think that's purely, Andrew, to get the name of that supplier onto the documentation, isn't it? Rather than to do with that registration and establishment.
Yeah, but under DAP, you can you could have the importer declared, because they could be responsible for the customs duties and import VAT anyway. But there are flexibilities within DAP where the UK company can pay for the duty and the VAT if necessary. It's just the EU company will be declared as the importer. So there are flexibilities within the INCO terms, but yeah, it's the EORI bit is obviously an issue if you're not established in the member state. They're clamping down on it.
They are. I think that's really an important point, because we've heard a lot of people going, "Oh, I only need to get an EU EORI," and I don't think it's not as simple as that, because yeah, you could get one at the moment, but post January, we've certainly seen in Netherlands legislation them saying, well, you can't just have an EORI number, you can have a registration number and an EORI number. That's absolutely the case. And likewise in the UK, if you are importing DDP, you should be registered for that because you're making an onward supply of goods. I think where the issue is, so that technically works on both sides of the channel. But what the issue is, obviously, is all about is, well, can I do that without being registered for that? In a lot of these countries, it's postponed import VAT accounting anyway, or deferred import VAT, which is why the limited fiscal rep idea and global VAT rep works in France, Germany, and Belgium. Sorry, France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, because it works there. I think somebody mentioned in one of the questions, what about Italy? Yeah, agree. Italy, that's not the case. You've got to pay it up front, claim it back. And as we all know, claiming VAT back in Italy under any terms is difficult. So yeah, if you can get your goods cleared in a different country and moved across as an intra-EU transaction into Italy, then that would certainly be a much better way to go.
Okay. Now I'm conscious of time. I'm going to squeeze one more in. If you can get a quick 60 seconds in on this one. You may have answered it though, Alison, anyway, but this last question, is there a standard method of VAT declaration in EU countries? I.e., where you have a VAT registration, does the import net off on the, say, Italian, for example, VAT return, or do you physically have to pay the VAT and wait for a refund?
Well, for the countries that do like we do, postponed, or like we will do, postponed import VAT accounting, you won't pay it to clear the goods, and you'll put it on your VAT return in that country, netted off. So Ireland also does deferred import VAT accounting, Germany, Belgium, France, Netherlands. Italy doesn't, so it would be like our current system. You'd pay it to clear the goods, and then you'd claim it back on your VAT return with a VAT certificate. So most countries, most Northern European countries, are now using the netting off on the VAT return, but the other countries don't.
Okay, brilliant. Now, thank you so much, both of you. I appreciate it. It's clear, I think, from the questions, there's still a lot of questions, obviously, around this. So for those of you that have other questions, I will put this video up on my LinkedIn feed so that you can kind of refer to it whenever you need to. But I think if you do have questions, please feel free to contact either Alison or Andrew at MHA. Their details are on the website, MHA MacIntyre Hudson, or on LinkedIn. By all means, contact them that way, or let me know. I'm happy to put you all in touch with whoever you need really to help at MHA. So that's it really. Thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you for everybody for logging on. I appreciate it. And a special thanks to Alison and Andrew for your time today. Thank you so much. And this formally ends the presentation. Thank you very much.
Have a good afternoon, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Bye.